Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this month's webinar. I'm Kishore Dasararaju. I'll be moderating this event today. Thank you, Professor Ayako and Natalie London for setting this up for us. I'll do a quick introduction of the speakers, and then we'll have the guest speaker and our panelist jump into the conversation. So today we have one of our industry experts from the packaging industry, who's been in the packaging industry for quite a few years now. Currently, he's working at a company called Takeda Pharmaceuticals. His name is Mr. Sriman Banerjee. He's head of packaging design and development, and focusing on commercial devices, developing products with partner and consumer-centric approach. He's dedicated to product growth, profit, and top performance teams. Sriman has held global authority and helped enable a competitive edge in packaging head positions at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, GlaxoSmithKline, or GSK, focusing on supplier relationships, product innovation aligned with category growth objectives, and consumer-centric offerings. He has numerous achievements. He has 29 global and regional awards, including World Star Awards for Innovation and Excellence. He has device innovation and development, including next generation delivery systems and lifecycle maintenance. He has worked on bringing substantial savings from new packaging materials, consumer insights, and supplier risk analysis, and built innovative programs to produce new R&D concepts and pipeline. So that's a quick intro of Mr. Sriman Banerjee. He'll be talking to us about sustainable packaging in a few minutes here. And I would like to introduce our other panelists that we have today, James Benefico. He's a CEO and founder of Organic Muscle. He had a life-changing experience by using some of the market products, energy products. So that inspired him to start his own company, Organic Muscle. So he's on a quest to create the healthiest, cleanest, and most effective fitness supplements on the market. Organic Muscle is the first company dedicated to offering customer certified organic workout and fitness supplements. Their herbs, superfoods, and sprouts and adaptogens are sourced from eco-friendly, sustainable, and certified organic farms. They are proud to blend and bottle products in California and Texas. So that's a quick intro. They'll introduce themselves as we move into the presentation. So today's agenda, so we'll have Mr. Sriman Banerjee present for like 30 minutes. He has quite a bit of knowledge that he would like to share with us. And then we'll have James quickly introduce himself and ask a question to the guest speaker. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So we want questions from you, all of you, the participants. So if you want to either post it in the chat or raise your hand, and then we can take some questions in the allotted 10 minutes. And we want you to, at the end of the seminar, we want you to post the takeaway from today's seminar in the chat session. So each one of you would have like 5 minutes to do that. And then we'll close it out with the conclusion in the last 5 minutes. So that's today's agenda. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Mr. Sriman Banerjee to start off his presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Kishore, for the kind introduction. Let me share my screen. I hope everybody can see the slides.
Yes.
Thank you. So as Kishore spoke a few minutes back, for the next 30 minutes or so, will take you through sustainable packaging and also provide you a little bit overview about packaging carbon footprints, some life cycle analysis, calculations, and a couple of other things as well. So what's the importance of packaging, and can any of you imagine a world without packaging, how it would be today? And packaging is not something new which was invented in the 19th century or the 18th century. In fact, packaging existed for thousands of years before that. In fact, the known glass or wooden packaging was even before 1 BC in terms of trade or even in terms of use of these packaging materials. Now, what does packaging do? It's got a couple of key important aspects to it. So it enables the product protection while it's being shipped or while it's being handled by whether it's consumers or even during the shipment. It helps in identifying the product. So as you can see on the pictorial depiction, what would happen if you have products in the retail but without any printing or without any identification? So it helps identifying the product as well. It helps in convenience, whether it's in terms of stocking at home, whether it's in terms of usage, whether it's in terms of many of the ready to eat packs which we buy at supermarket, and several other factors associated with it. It helps in brand interface, which is in terms of the promotion of the brand, marketing, and several other features associated with packaging. So packaging forms a very important role, whether it's for the shelf life of the product, whether it is for the branding of the product, whether it's for the identification, ease of use, convenience, and several other things. So what are some of the conventional packaging materials which we know of? It's glass, which we use many a times at our homes, whether it's for pharmaceutical bottles, whether it is for food packaging, beverages, etc. We use a lot of metal and tin for food packaging. We use paper, which is most of the cartons which are used are made out of paper. We use plastics, whether it's beverage bottles, water bottles, or even cosmetics, shampoos, soaps. And we also use a lot of wood, which is mainly for pallets and for crates. With that as the background, there are some new materials which are coming into play nowadays, which is whether it's starch-based, whether it's plant-based, biopolymers, recycled plastics, compostable, and we hear these names quite often, whether it's in the social media or whether when we buy it, when we go to supermarkets to buy products, we see labels being mentioned that it is compostable, it is made of biopolymers, etc. So I'll touch upon some of these materials as we speak and the importance of some of these materials going forward. But before that, what is the basic packaging carbon footprint? And while there is a lot of talk about carbon footprint, but for most products, the carbon footprint of packaging is actually somewhere around 8%. And that's an important criteria because what you consume is actually 92% of the carbon footprint as against 8% of the packaging material which is being used to contain or to ship the product to you. Also, one thing which we need to note here is there are two aspects in packaging, and packaging is in a very unique position in that, which is on one end, you have the carbon aspect of it, which is the carbon footprint. On the other end is the end of life, which is typically the disposal of the packaging and therefore the wastage which comes along with the packaging. So it's a very fine balance which needs to be maintained between the carbon footprint and the waste management aspects of it. I won't go through the most of the definitions here as you would be aware of it, and plus this slide will be shared with all of y'all, but I'll touch upon 2 or 3 important things here. So the first one I would like to touch upon is the aspect of circular economy, which is coming up very widely in Europe in terms of whether it's recycling or reusing of most of the materials, with the understanding that the earth does not have an unlimited resources and we need to balance the usage as well as try to as much go into a circular mode rather than the linear sustainable mode, which used to be the theme earlier. The second bit which I would like to touch upon is green inflation, which is inflation caused due to green economy. And in all fairness and transparency, there is a cost of going sustainable. It's anywhere between 10 to 20% is the cost of going sustainable. And that has an impact in terms of what you decide to buy, or it has an impact of the cost of living as well in terms of going sustainable. And the last bit which I would like to share is the greenwashing definition, which is basically making claims which cannot be substantiated adequately in terms of sustainability. While we keep on discussing carbon footprint, climate change, etc., but we also miss there are several other environmental concerns which we need to consider, which is water, which is depletion of natural resources, food safety or product safety, as well as how do we cater to the ever growing population globally. So all these aspects also needs to be considered while taking into consideration the aspects of sustainability, packaging, and how do we go about addressing and resolving some of these challenges. This is a general eco-design process which tends to be used for any design, including packaging, which starts with innovation, where the first bit of it is the design aspects are taken into consideration. Then we get into the materials and the selection of the materials, the manufacturing process, and how we can efficiently manufacture the product. Also, we need to take into account the transport efficiency here, and which is a very key aspect of it. To give an example, for example, if you use glass, glass is a very heavy material. And because it's a very heavy material, if you transport it across long distances, then the carbon footprint of transporting glass along with the product or even empty glass bottles is significant. So that's another place where you need to be very selective in terms of the material you use, because you don't want to create carbon along the way during the transport process as well. And eventually, obviously, you will also have to think, particularly for packaging, the optimized end of life. How do you dispose it? Whether it needs to be incinerated, recycled, reused, or any other factors which comes into play along with it. So in the next couple of slides, I will quickly take you through some of the new innovations or materials which are being considered. As you can see on the screen, this is a fabric detergent which has been launched by P&G, and it's basically a paper bottle with the cap or with the closure of plastics, but predominantly a paper-based bottle. And it again can be recycled. It's bio-based, and currently it's being used for liquids or even powders for that matter. And there is a lot of traction, I would say, in terms of this packaging as well, which is a paper-based, I would say, packaging. The second one is you would have seen a lot of trays, including the trays which come along with electronics, including the iPhones or even the iPads, laptops, etc. So these trays or blisters, as we would call it, is also, earlier, if you appreciate and recollect, used to be made out of plastics, which is now getting replaced with fiber and composites. And again, it can be molded and the finishes are pretty good, and it's a good replacement for plastics in this space. The other material which I would like to again, some of these materials which I will speak on is also very niche, right? So for example, you will see this, which is being used for wine bottles, which is again a container made out of hemp and psyllium. And it's again a very niche, but an alternative to say paper or even plastics in some of these areas. This is a very unique example here, which is an alternate source of plastics. So as many of us know, plastics is derived from crude or crude oil. There is another alternative way of making plastics, which is through bio-based, which is sugarcane, ethanol, and then you make plastics out of it. So this bottle, which you can see on the screen, is actually a plastic bottle made out of sugarcane. And again, it's making inroads into different applications and markets as well. So Brazil again is one of the biggest manufacturers of this polymers because they have huge fields of sugarcane and corn from where they convert into ethanol and into plastics. This is again another example in terms of as much as we think that single material might be a good source of carbon footprint, but sometimes, for example, single material may be higher in weight as compared to composites. And these are some of the examples where you can use composites which can be easily separated and therefore recycled. On the left hand side is a picture of an yogurt tub made out of plastics, but the stiffness and all other elements comes from the paperboard carton, which can be separated, but the combination of this has a very low carbon footprint. So sometimes when you're balancing the carbon aspect of packaging, we need to take into consideration uh, through life cycle analysis, what is the best combination in terms of the carbon footprint of the polymer as well. Uh, Nowadays, we will see that I would say almost all the water bottles which are available in the Western world made out of 100% recycled plastics or 100% recycled PET. So PET again is one of the very few materials which has a very high recycling rate, up to 60%. And we see a lot of use of, therefore, recycled PET in beverage bottles, particularly water. Uh, the recycling process is done through either depolymerization or pyrolysis using the chemical technology. And again, it's widely being used globally for PET. And PET, as I mentioned, is one of the highest recycled material in the world and the highest in the plastics category as well. The other thing which we see happening is digitization in some form, right? And we have been hearing about digital processes. So what's happening is also the conventional printing machines, which used to be consuming a lot of ink, energy, etc., and also set up time as well as wastage, is being replaced by modern digital print technologies, which can effectively print much better. It's lower inventory, lower wastage, and also very clean process of manufacturing. So while materials are one aspect of it, but there are other things also happening in this area of packaging, which also relates to processes and manufacturing to make it much more cleaner in terms of whether it's energy efficiency, wastage, or even carbon and water consumption. There is a lot of discussion about biodegradable and compostable. And obviously, the definition on the screen is self-explanatory. Compostable, to note, needs industrial composting. And places where industrial composting is not available, mind you, the packaging which is disposed of will not compost in a typical 60 180 days time frame. It will take much longer, and it might disintegrate and create additional challenges in that space. So compostable, it's ideal where composting is available and composting can be done. On the other hand, biodegradable obviously takes a longer time to degrade, and it's again, I mean, it's a fine balance between biodegradable and compostable in that space. So what does the future look like? And this is interesting because there are environmental regulations coming in terms of whether it's single-use plastics, use of recycled content, ease of recycling, how do you dispose of, use, etc. And it's, as I mentioned, it's a very fine balance between carbon footprint and recycling. So again, to cite an example between glass and plastics, glass has one of the highest carbon footprints on packaging, but potentially it has an higher recycling rate, as we all know, compared to plastics, which has the lowest carbon footprint amongst packaging. But at times we also hear it's not highly recyclable, or it does not get recycled in some form, right? So it's a very fine balance, and how do you therefore maintain that balance here? There are new FDA guidelines coming in, standards. There are communications. For example, in the US, you will find most of the packs having this logo of how to recycle, guiding consumers how to dispose of packaging at the end of life, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of things which are happening in this area, which also links to how future is. And you can see some of the examples here, which for example, P&G has got a Tide pack, which is a replacement of plastic using composites. We see bottles made now out of ocean plastics. We also have heard about Loop, which uses metal reusable containers for reuse. And where do we go from here? So what the industry is trying to do is obviously design for separation. So which means they are developing packaging which can be easily separated and therefore put into different recycle bins. Use of materials which can be easily recyclable. So some of the plastics which we know are challenging to recycle, for example, PVC, the industry is slowly moving away from that into materials which can easily be recycled. There's a lot of communication and consumer increase in consumer knowledge in terms of how to recycle uh, packaging, and also how do you enable recycling in terms of uh, proper packaging formats, and how do you dispose of those formats as well, because that's another area to consider, that which formats are recyclable and which formats have challenges in recycling. So with that, connecting to the topic of management in terms of what do we see from a consumer standpoint, and there are a couple of things which are coming up, which is obviously when you do a research on the subject, you will hear consumers saying they would like to use products which are sustainable. They would like to use packaging which can be recycled, and so on and so forth. But in reality, when a product is launched with some of these features, it actually does not, take off much at the retail shelf. And it's dominated by a couple of factors, which is the willingness to pay, which I mentioned that most of the sustainable products comes at a premium. It's the purchasing influence, peer pressure, and a couple of other things. The purchasing habit of individuals in terms of buying sustainable products. The demographics and different age group demonstrate different engagement with sustainability. And it's also related with one of the key aspects here, which is convenience. And convenience drives most of the times what the consumers want to buy, where to buy, and factors associated with it. So with that, I would hand it over back to Kishore. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sriman. That was very enlightening. What are the newer products in the industry, materials that have been used? I know we studied some of those in our recent classes, but it's good to see what's being used in the current industry. And thank you for sharing that with us. I know we are a little bit ahead, so I'll take another minute to kind of complete my introductions. I don't know why I got a bit nervous when I started my introductions. So just to let you all know, in case you're wondering, right? So Sriman lives in the greater Boston area, so he's pretty much practically my neighbor. We live in the same neighborhood in the greater Boston area. He has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and master's in financial management, and also he has master's in packaging and also in plastic and polymer technologies, right? And yeah, he works at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, as we know. And James Benefico, who will be introducing himself and about his business. He has an economics from the University of Connecticut, and he currently lives in Austin, Texas. He's going to share about his passionate business, Organic Muscle, and he'll also have a few questions and interactions with our guest speaker, Sriman. James, please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction. Sriman, I really enjoyed that presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, everyone. I'm James Benefico. I started Organic Muscle 8 years ago after almost having a heart attack taking a popular pre-workout supplement. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but a lot of people I speak with have consumed energy drinks and gotten sick, so it's a reoccurring theme. So I came up with the idea to make a clean organic pre-workout, and that's what we did. And now that product, if you type in organic pre-workout on Amazon, it's the first one that comes up. It has about 5,700 reviews. So our mission has just been to take the supplement industry in a cleaner, more transparent direction. And part of that now is pivoting to more sustainable packaging. So I'm no expert in this by any means, but I'm learning, and it's something I care about, and it's something our customers care about. So I can show you some of our current packaging. We use these BPA-free plastic bottles for our pre-workout. We also moved in the direction of using pouches. These are single serving pouches in here, and they use a lot less plastic. So that's a potential direction for us. But I've also been interested in paper tubes, glass. So really, this is very interesting to me, and I'm looking forward to learning more about what you think is the best option for an organic supplement, because our biggest concern, actually, we were in talks with a paper tube company for several months, and we almost transitioned our entire product line to paper packaging. But after more investigation, we realized that the paper tubes, they're susceptible to heat and dampness getting into the product. And since we don't use preservatives in our products, it can cause the powder to harden and clump up. So that was a logistical concern for us. So I would love to pick both of your minds about, for a powder product, what do you foresee being the solution for this type of product?
So thanks, James, and thank you for introducing your company. And as I mentioned, some of these topics relate to shelf life of the product as well, right? The barrier properties and so on. And I know there is a lot of talks about plastics and banning plastics and so on and so forth. But we need to take a step back and appreciate and realize that how plastics have also changed our lives, right? And how it can efficiently transform some of the products which we are taking, consuming, etc. Right? So can we imagine a world without plastics? So, I mean, as I speak to you, even my spectacles, which I'm using, is made out of plastics, right? And without that, at least I can't imagine the world, because I will be hampered in my eyesight if nothing else. But having said that, plastics is one of the materials which is good for your product, because it will give you the barrier as well as the shelf life which is required. And also, for example, whether it is PET or polyethylene based plastics, the rigid plastics, they again are having a lower carbon footprint as compared to glass, because the other alternative for you is to use glass, right? But plastics will have a lower carbon footprint, plus at least these two plastic materials are also highly recycled. So when you dispose it off in the recycling stream, it will definitely get recycled into some form. Right now, people tend to use some of the materials which I presented because you can make some claims out of using the composite paper and so on and so forth, which is quote unquote it's made out of natural material and so on and so forth. But at times the challenge comes in terms of the shelf life. Right. So I always say that you can have bread at the bakery. If you take loose bread, it will last you for 1 or 2 days before it catches fungus. But if you take the bread which is packed in a polyethylene bag, then that lasts for more than a week. And that's where also the aspect of convenience comes in. That why do we buy a loaf of bread, and that's because we don't want to go to the bakery, or it's not possible for us to go to the bakery every day, right? So there are several aspects which we need to take into consideration in terms of when we develop the packaging and also correlate it with sustainability.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And it makes me think about another potential option. I'd be very curious to hear your opinion about tin and aluminum packaging. It's used in quite a few different products, like sardines, I believe, are in aluminum tins, things like that. And they also have bottles in this shape that are tins. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So James, again, it's as I mentioned earlier, it depends on what aspect of it you're looking at. So if you're looking at the carbon footprint, then tin and metals have challenges with carbon footprint because it is on the higher side of carbon footprint, right, as compared to plastics. Additionally, it's also very expensive. Right now, many of these today, as we speak, many of the plastics and metals, they are more or less recycled in the same percentage. Therefore, it logically, I mean, unless you're looking at further higher shelf life. So for example, aluminum or a tin plate can will give you more shelf life than plastics. Right. So if that's the aspect you're looking at, then again, metal or tin plate is a good option.
Okay. If you were a betting man, which technology would you bet on being the future prominent technology that kind of takes over?
So each of these materials, James, will have a role to play, right? Because we have 7 billion people globally, and it's not a very small number. And all of these all the materials have a role to play in packaging. And I'll give you subtle examples here, right? So for example, if you take Europe or the Scandinavian countries, they use a lot of paperboard. For the simple reason is they grow a sustainable forest, which can be converted into use of paper pulp. And therefore they have that as a natural resource to a large extent and use that for paper packaging. So you will see Europe predominantly using a lot of paper packaging. Now let's come to the Middle East. In the Middle East, if you go and ask people for paper, they will say that, see, we have got 4 palm trees here, and half the time, by the time we reach the palm trees, it seems to be a mirage, right? And then you need water to make paper. They'll say, yeah, we have a lot of water, but they are all saline water from the sea. And so on. So what they have as a natural resource is oil from where they can make plastics, because it's again, which geography you're coming from, and therefore what you have as a resource to convert into a suitable material. Right. And I gave you the example of Brazil, which does not have natural crude oil, but they have learned the mechanism of using corn and sugarcane into converting into oil.
Mm.
So it's a fair balance and play based on life cycle analysis is when you will select a material for a given geography, application, and so on. Because if you suddenly start trying to do life cycle analysis for paper usage in Saudi Arabia, the carbon footprint will be very high because they don't produce paper. The paper has to come, or the pulp has to come from a different part of the world, and vice versa.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. And then countries like Saudi Arabia can in turn potentially invest more in their recycling facilities to balance it out.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you for that.
Wonderful.
And I see
Yeah.
a lot of questions. So Kishore, you
Right.
want to take the questions, or how do we do it?
Yeah, I'll get to those in a second. So just before we get on to the questions, I know we are doing very good on time. So thank you so much, James, for your thoughts and insights and sharing that with us. Yeah, it's curious, right? So it's pretty global. It's not like unique to any particular country or economy, right? So we're all a global economy right now, and like Sriman mentioned, it all depends on what's available locally and what's most economical, right? And before I move on to the topic, James's company, you should all check out his website, organicmuzzle.com. They are actually uh, planting a tree for each of the products sold from their website, right? Giving back to sustainability again. And I appreciate James for considering that as part of your business model as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So, okay, let's get into some of these questions. And I request all of you to post your comments and questions in the chat as well. So the first one that we have is from Lani. Are any of these alternatives to crude oil-based plastic production cost-effective in the mass market yet?
So Lani, it will depend on, how do you define the cost effectiveness, right? So just to give you a brief example of the costing. So for example, the recycled PET comes anywhere between 5 to 10% up cost over conventional plastics. As also the biopolymers, which I mentioned, comes anywhere between 10 to 20% up cost. So, I mean, from that angle, it is higher in cost, but many of the companies have decided to invest in sustainable materials, and therefore you find many of these available today. But to answer your question, there is an up cost, which, as I also mentioned about greenflation, where it comes into play.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Lani. Hope that answers your question. The other one we have is from Shreya. If we are to still consider recycling a viable solution for circularity, how can we solve for downcycling of plastics?
So Shreya, that's a good question. And again, I would like to give two examples here. So for example, PET has actually not got downcycled, right? So PET is either it's got upcycled or it is reused in the same format which was used earlier, which is bottles. While some of the other plastics, they tend to be mixed plastics. And when it gets into mixed plastics, I mean, it's very difficult to upcycle it to a large extent. And therefore, most of it today is downcycled, but also downcycled in areas where there is an alternate requirement. So let's take the example of park benches, which hitherto would have been made out of wood, and for which you would have had to cut down wooden trees, etc. Here you have an alternative, which is to use recycled plastics as an alternate to some of wooden benches, etc. So while it might not be defined as upcycle, but it's a very good replacement for some of the natural materials which hitherto would have got used.
Mm-hmm. That is a good example. I know Shreya has another follow-up question on that PETs, right? So that PET is highly recycled, but more often than not, it gets lost in contamination, especially in single stream recycling. How do we solve for this on a large community-based scale?
So it's also consumers who are responsible for it, right? Consumers, peoples, individuals, society, etc. right? I mean, there is in all the towns, there are instructions in terms of recycling, but I don't think many of us follow those instructions. It's very clearly mentioned that you're supposed to wash the bottles before putting it in the recycling stream. You're supposed to have the caps put on the bottles or the containers before it is disposed of, and so on and so forth. Uh, Having said that, with the chemical processes, which is the pyrolysis, etc., that has a mechanism of eliminating the contamination, etc., because the temperature at which the pyrolysis takes place is close to 900, 800 degrees Celsius. So, I mean, at those temperatures, I mean, most of the contaminations virtually go off, and there is a washing before that, etc. But yes, we as consumers and individuals also have to be conscious of our responsibilities in terms of the instructions to be followed.
Exactly. So as part of the class, right, we learned about how to recycle different kinds of materials and how the local towns, cities, or governments and municipalities are encouraging people to start doing that. And I know I'll share a quick example, right? So, I mean, I got inspired by the leadership class that we were in recently from Professor Ayako, like connecting to nature and what is our responsibility as people and families in the community to do our best. So yeah, I recently started doing a couple things. Just as an example, is started doing organic composting, which is available as an option in our community, luckily. So we do organic composting. It's a new service that I subscribe to. And once we started doing that, like 30-40% of our trash, which was going to landfill, has been reduced, right? Just by doing that. And every couple of weeks, they come and pick it up and they give us the compost next year for our spring garden, for example. That's one thing. And even I found out some options locally on how to recycle plastic bags. I think it might be available in a lot of communities as well. But doing these two, right, my trash has gone down so much. I'm actually planning to cancel my trash pickup service and personally myself dropping it off at the transfer station, because I don't want to pay like $50 a month because I'm not even producing like a bag or two every 2 weeks for landfill anymore, right? So I think that's our responsibility, like Sriman just mentioned, what we can do to reduce the amount of landfill plastics that goes in by doing our part as well, right? There are a couple more questions. Lani, thank you for answering or commenting earlier. So Ty has a question. It is a beneficial for our globe to use the new materials. What is the most barrier which prevents us to replace the packaging with the new materials? How to overcome that?
So, Thao, the biggest challenge which we have today is the availability or economies of scale for some of these materials, right? And that's being overcome as we speak in some of these areas. So we have been seeing a lot of bio-based material availability which has come through. So when you go to retail, you will see bio-based compostable packaging available now. However, as I mentioned, the biggest challenge is the availability, and that availability also therefore links to the economics, which is the cost aspect of it. So once there will be mass availability, potentially, I mean, the cost, it has a aspect of the cost coming down, manufacturability, and so on and so forth as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? It's all about economy, how much companies can invest and how much would that affect their profit margins, right? Ty also has a follow-up question. Is there any way to promote other countries, especially developing countries, to use new materials?
So developing countries have been using some of these materials in some form or the other, because, for example, cost has always been a challenge in some of these countries, right? And what they have been doing historically is using a lot of flexible packaging. So if many of you recollect, few minutes back, James showed a packet of the muscle powder in flexible packaging. So they have been using the flexible packaging for quite some time because it has lower use of materials, and it's also got lower carbon footprint. Now that has created other issues in these markets, which is these historically, I mean, these flexible packaging was not recyclable, right? And therefore, it used to, get into either landfill, incinerator, etc. But nevertheless, with modern technologies, they have been able to find solution in terms of recycling these pouches. And that's where I would say many of these countries are trying to go in terms of use of, use and defining, I would say, sustainable packaging.
Right, right.
An
Yeah, so
interesting thing to, sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Interesting thing to bring up, and another element to consider is with these, it weighs a lot less than other
Yes.
plastic bottles. So you have to consider savings on gasoline, less fuel being used. I think that's meaningful for the environment and these companies that are looking to save on their shipping and transportation costs.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And James, if you recollect, I touched upon that in the presentation, that one aspect which we all need to consider is also the shipping of the finished product, because that has a huge element in terms of carbon footprint.
And speaking from experience, companies like ours spend a lot on shipping. So coming up with solutions that can help businesses save money, it can help these better technologies be implemented faster.
Right. Yeah. So, James, if I may ask you a question,
Sure.
like how much of your packaging is like recyclable at the moment, and what are your thoughts on? I know you were talking to Sriman earlier about some options of converting them to sustainable packaging, right? So, what can you share about your
Yes,
products?
we're looking to switch over everything in due time. As I mentioned, I was this close to pulling the trigger on the paper tubes until we figured the risk was too high. If we lose an entire batch of product, I mean, that's potentially fatal for a business. You know, if you're ordering 10,000 units and they all go bad, you know, it's very risky. But I love the paper tubes, and I'm wondering if, as that technology develops, they'll be able to overcome that problem, because there's a huge opportunity in the supplement space for something like that. I speak to other entrepreneurs and they're trying to move away from plastic as well. But our bottles are not currently recycled, but our pouches are. So and then we have one product that's in glass, just one. So we're experimenting with that. It's a small bottle, but again, I'm looking for the solution, and there's a lot to think about, a lot of different angles to consider. But I feel like I've learned so much here.
Right. So, Sriman, just to follow up on that, right? So, how would companies like James's can go into sustainable packaging? What would bring them confidence in terms of product like shelf life? If they want to start using some of these products, how can they test them? How can they adopt them? Are there any strategies or recommendations?
So James will have to hire a packaging technologist for that, right? That's where it comes into play. But having said that, I mean, for small businesses, there are a lot of packaging consultancy firms which can do this exercise for James. For example, while James may not be able to use an absolute paper tube, but there are paper tubes available which have got an aluminium barrier or an aluminium coating inside it, right? So those are also available in terms of alternatives.
It's like a hybrid product.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So the interior wall, I believe,
is aluminium foil.
Okay, that's great. If you have a good company selling those,
sure.
please let me know.
Wonderful. I know we have a minute or
I'm
two.
lucky I'm not a lawyer, otherwise I would have sent James a bill after the call, but
Yeah.
I've got enough of those.
Yeah, thank you for keeping it lively here. I think Lani has another comment. It's saying that some of the cities have some laws about like not recycling, it's illegal not to recycle. So I think some of us have to look into that and find out what are our laws, local laws on recycling, and follow those so that we don't get in trouble. There's, I think, a couple more questions. We'll see if we can take one last question. What is autonomous hydrogen logistics? Any idea on that, Sriman, maybe? Mark has that question.
I was just saying, that could decrease the carbon impact on transportation. So why aren't there more advances in autonomous hydrogen logistics?
So Switzerland, Mark, sorry, Kishore, you were saying something.
No, I didn't. Go ahead, please.
So Mark, Switzerland has pioneering, hydrogen as an alternative. So if you see, most of the taxis in Switzerland have moved into hydrogen, right? And they are also trying to use hydrogen for trucks and transport. So I mean, there is alternatives which people are trying to work on, whether it's hydrogen, electric, or otherwise as well in this area. And therefore, when you do a life cycle analysis, you actually take into consideration your mode of transport very critically in terms of whether it's going to be air shipment, sea shipment, or road shipment. And nowadays, even in the road shipment aspect, they give alternate of electric. I'm not sure whether they have included hydrogen yet because of it being a very small component as we speak. But I guess in the future, they will also have the hydrogen included in the life cycle analysis.
Yeah. In the interest of time, we'll take one last question and then we'll move on to the next agenda topic. So based on what you have just said, do you think it's more impactful to focus on creating enzymes that can more efficiently digest the bonds in plastic? Focus on creating alternative to plastic, because it seems the main issue with plastic is that microorganism cannot efficiently digest it, but otherwise it's very helpful.
So there are 2 or 3 things which needs to happen, right? And some of this is again opinion rather than anything else, as I would call it. So the first bit is, I mean, all our waste which is there, and I saw a lot of messages or questions about waste management, recycling in towns, etc. So I would like to try to answer that as well into this. So what is happening is, many of our waste which is there nowadays actually does not get into landfill because we don't have too much of land any longer, one to fill. And wherever you want to fill, you have a house next to it. So therefore you can't use that land any longer, right? So most of it is actually getting into incinerated, right? And for incinerating, one critical component which you need is some form of a material which can release energy, and that's where plastics comes into play. So you need a little amount of plastics for incineration, otherwise it's it will not give any energy output, or it would be difficult to incinerate. So that's one thing which is happening, which is many of these things are getting into incineration. The second thing which is also happening is there is a very high amount of focus on circular economy, as I mentioned, and that's where most of the materials are getting actually recycled. Now, the third area, which is right, is we need to find out, what if it's not getting recycled, reused, or incinerated, then what do we do with the rest? Which is also fine balance between how do we dispose of some of these materials? Because if we dispose of in a way which is, throwing trash on the streets, etc., then obviously it will not, get into it will get into the environment, creating, whether it's microplastics or anything of that nature. For example, we see a lot of, bottles floating in the ocean, but surely I don't think the bottles have walked into the ocean, right? I mean, somebody would have disposed it irresponsibly, and therefore we see some of these plastics in the ocean and so on and so forth. I again would like to give an example here of Japan. where Japan incinerates most of its waste, right? Because it's a small country, they don't have landfill, and they have been incinerating a lot of their waste, etc. And therefore, you don't see this contamination in the environment. The issue with plastics or any material for that matter, hitherto it used to be glass in the beaches, right? People used to drink whether it's beverages or any other drink and throw it in the beaches. So it's basically got to do with waste management and how well we can manage it so that it does not get into any of the natural, whether it's water streams, land, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. So it's been a great conversation, Sriman and James. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and bringing in industry advice and advancements to all of us. I know some of us have been studying about it, and we also did some smaller projects and get to learn about some of these things. It's been a wonderful experience chatting with you all. Class, thank you so much for participating, and all of our friends, thanks for posing your questions and sharing your comments. It's been a great conversation. So I see some wonderful comments coming in. I'll try to wrap it up. So Sriman, thank you for inspiring us that some of us who are working in the sustainability can inspire to probably get into the field of packaging and sustainable industry-related jobs in the future. Thank you for inspiring us. And James, all the best for your business.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll be able to convert all of your packaging into sustainable packaging pretty soon. And that'll also be a good brand marketing strategy for your business. And thank you for bringing sustainability into your business by planting trees as well. I really appreciate that. And we as consumers, I mean, I know we are students, and as consumers, I think we need to do our part. So think about what you can do in terms of circular model, promoting businesses by buying those products, and also doing our part in the communities that we live in by recycling properly, like Sriman mentioned, right? So it starts from us. So we have to support the right companies, do our part to recycle the way the products are supposed to be, so that we do our part in the overall sustainability model as well. So yeah, again, thanks everyone for your participation today, and have a wonderful weekend and happy recycling.